The forest breathed with winter's cruel whisper as Ravenna Nightcrest knelt beside the frozen stream, her white hair cascading over the scarlet fabric of her dress, like moonlight bleeding into wine. Her fingers, numb and trembling, gathered the last pieces of firewood she could carry. The cold had teeth that season, and it bit deep into the small village where she lived alone, where whispers followed her like shadows because she was Omega, because she was different, because she existed on the margins of a world that had no place for those without pack or protection. She was about to turn back when she heard it. A sound so faint it might have been the wind. But Ravenna had learned to listen to the silences between breaths, to hear what others ignored. There, collapsed against an ancient oak, was an old woman, her silver hair matted with ice, her clothes torn and inadequate against the descending cold. Her eyes were open but distant, clouded with confusion and fear. Ravenna dropped her firewood and rushed forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. The woman's lips were blue, her skin like parchment stretched too thin. When Ravenna touched her shoulder, the old woman flinched, then looked up with eyes that held no recognition, no memory, only the raw, animal terror of someone lost in a world they no longer understood. "Who are you? Where did you come from?" Ravenna asked, her voice soft, careful not to frighten the fragile creature before her. The old woman's mouth moved, but no coherent words emerged. Only fragments. Cold. So cold. Lost. Can't remember. The words tumbled out like broken pottery. Pieces of something that once held meaning, but now lay shattered and incomplete. Ravenna made a decision in that moment. The kind of decision that alters the trajectory of a life, though she could not know it then. She removed her own cloak and wrapped it around the shivering woman, then helped her to her feet. The old woman was light, too light, as if life had been slowly leaving her for some time. "Come with me. I'll take you somewhere warm." "You'll be safe," Ravenna promised, though safety was a luxury she herself had rarely known. They began the journey back toward the village, Ravenna supporting most of the woman's weight, moving slowly through the darkening woods. The sky had taken on a strange quality, a peculiar heaviness that made the air itself feel thick and ominous. Ravenna had lived through many winters, but she had never seen clouds like these, so low and swollen they seemed ready to burst with something more terrible than mere snow. The first flakes began to fall as they reached the forest's edge. Within minutes, those gentle flakes transformed into a furious assault, wind howling like a living thing, snow coming down so thick that Ravenna could barely see 3 feet ahead. The worst snowstorm the kingdom had ever witnessed was being born, and they were caught in its very teeth. The old woman stumbled, nearly taking them both down. Ravenna tightened her grip, her own strength waning but her determination fierce. She would not let this woman die in the cold. She would not leave another soul to suffer alone, not when she had the power to prevent it. The village lights were invisible through the whiteout. Ravenna relied on instinct and memory, counting her steps, feeling for familiar landmarks beneath the rapidly accumulating snow. Her small cottage sat at the village's northern edge, isolated from the others, which now seemed less like exile and more like providence. They would not have to navigate the suspicious stares and cruel whispers of her neighbors to reach sanctuary. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from and how old you are. I hope you enjoy the story. When her door finally appeared through the storm, Ravenna nearly wept with relief. She pushed it open, half dragging the old woman inside, then slammed it shut against the screaming wind. The interior was barely warmer than outside. Her fire had died to embers during her absence, and the cold had crept in through every crack and crevice. Ravenna settled the old woman into her only chair, then moved with practiced efficiency despite her exhaustion. She built up the fire until it roared and crackled, filling the small space with light and warmth. She heated water and made tea with the last of her precious herbs, then wrapped the woman in every blanket she owned. The old woman sipped the tea with trembling hands, and slowly, color began to return to her cheeks. Her eyes, though still confused, held gratitude. Ravenna knelt before her, studying that weathered face, wondering at the story it contained, the memories locked behind walls of fog and forgetting. "What's your name?" Ravenna tried again, her voice gentle as falling snow. The woman's brow furrowed with concentration, with the effort of grasping something that kept slipping away. "I don't," she began, then stopped, frustrated tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know. I can't remember. There was something, someone, a boy, my boy." Her hands clutched at empty air, as if trying to hold on to something precious that kept dissolving. "He needs me. I have to find him." Ravenna's heart ached at the desperation in those words. She took the old woman's cold hands in her own. "You're safe now. Rest. The storm will pass, and then we'll figure out who you are and where you belong." But even as she spoke, Ravenna wondered if that was true. The storm outside had taken on an apocalyptic quality, the wind a constant shriek, the snow falling so heavily that it seemed intent on burying the entire world. She had never seen or heard of anything like it. They were trapped together, two souls who had each been lost in their own way, now bound by circumstance and a simple act of compassion. That first night was long and strange. The old woman drifted in and out of sleep, sometimes murmuring words that made no sense, names and places that meant nothing to Ravenna. Sometimes she would wake with a start, looking around wildly, asking for someone named Nathaniel, her voice breaking with urgency and love. Each time Ravenna would soothe her, would promise that everything would be all right, though she had no idea if that was true. The storm intensified as midnight approached. The wind no longer howled. It shrieked, a primal sound that seemed to come from the throat of some ancient beast. The cottage shuddered with each gust, snow forcing its way through cracks in the walls, the temperature dropping despite the roaring fire. Ravenna fed log after log into the flames, watching their precious fuel supply dwindle with growing concern. The old woman, bundled in every blanket Ravenna owned, still shivered. Her teeth chattered when she breathed, her lips maintaining that frightening blue tinge despite hours by the fire. Ravenna made a decision. She climbed into the chair beside the woman, wrapping her own body around the frail form, sharing her warmth, her youth, her life force with this stranger who had no one else. The woman's shivering gradually subsided. She turned her face into Ravenna's shoulder, and in a moment of heartbreaking vulnerability, whispered, "Thank you. I don't know who you are, but thank you." Ravenna's throat tightened with emotion. "You don't need to thank me. Just rest. Just stay with me." Hours passed in strange intimacy. The old woman would drift into sleep, then wake gasping, reaching for someone who was not there. And each time, Ravenna would hold her closer, would hum soft melodies her own mother had sung before she died, would stroke the silver hair until calm returned. In those dark hours, as the storm raged and the world seemed to be ending outside their fragile shelter, something profound was happening. Two souls, each accustomed to solitude and suffering, were learning that they did not have to face the darkness alone, that there was strength in vulnerability, that there was power in allowing oneself to be cared for and to care in return. "Tell me about your boy," Ravenna said softly during one of the woman's lucid moments. "The one you keep calling for." "Nathaniel." The old woman's face transformed. Even through the fog of her broken memory, love shone through like sunlight breaking clouds. She struggled, searching for words that kept slipping away. "He's everything. Strong. So strong. But kind. People don't see that. They see the warrior, the king, the power. But I see," her voice broke, "I see my little boy who used to bring me wildflowers, who would cry when he saw suffering, who loved so fiercely it frightened him." She clutched at Ravenna's hand with surprising strength. "He'll be looking for me. He'll be so afraid." "My son, he doesn't show fear. But I know. I've always known. When he's afraid, he becomes like stone, like ice. He pushes everyone away. She looked directly into Ravenna's eyes, a moment of perfect clarity breaking through the confusion. If you ever meet him, if he ever finds me here, please don't be afraid of him. He needs, she faltered, he needs someone who can see past the walls, someone who isn't afraid to be soft when he is hard. Ravenna did not understand why this woman was telling her such intimate things about a son she would likely never meet. But she nodded anyway, committing those words to memory, honoring the trust being placed in her. I promise, she said simply. If I ever meet your son, I will remember what you've told me. The woman smiled then, a beautiful expression that hinted at the woman she must have been before age and illness claimed her. Good. That's good. She closed her eyes, settling more comfortably against Ravenna. You have a good heart, child. A pure heart. The moon blessed you when it gave you that silver hair. Ravenna touched her white locks self-consciously. Others had mocked her hair, called it unnatural, used it as another reason to keep their distance. But this woman spoke of it as if it were something beautiful, something sacred. They slept fitfully through that endless night, two women clinging to each other for warmth and comfort, while the world outside tried to tear itself apart. Meanwhile, miles away in the capital, in a palace of stone and shadow, Nathaniel Voidfang stood at a window watching the storm rage against his kingdom. He was a mountain of a man, tall and powerfully built, with long black hair that fell past his shoulders, and a beard that gave him the appearance of some ancient warrior king. Which, in many ways, he was. His people called him the Alpha King, and they feared him as much as they revered him. He was fierce in battle, ruthless with enemies, a force of nature that could not be stopped or swayed. His very presence commanded submission. His voice could shake the foundations of buildings. His anger was a terrible thing that left destruction in its wake. But those who knew him best understood that beneath that fearsome exterior beat a heart capable of profound love and loyalty. And the greatest of those loves had always been reserved for his mother. Nathaniel's jaw clenched as he stared into the storm. She had been missing for 3 days now. 3 days of searching, of sending his best trackers into the wilderness, of using every resource at his command. And they had found nothing. It was as if she had simply vanished from the world. His mother had been suffering from a sickness of the mind, one that came on slowly at first, then accelerated with cruel swiftness. She forgot things. Names, places, conversations they had just moments before. Sometimes she would look at him with eyes that held no recognition, and those moments broke something inside him that he did not know how to repair. He remembered the first time it happened. 6 months ago, she had been telling him a story about his childhood, animated and engaged, when suddenly her words faltered. She had looked at him with confusion, then fear, asking who he was and what he wanted. The moment had lasted only seconds before clarity returned, but those seconds had felt like an eternity. Since then, the episodes had become more frequent, more prolonged. The palace healers could do nothing. They spoke of age, of the natural decline of the mind, of the cruel ways time claimed everything eventually. But Nathaniel refused to accept it. This was his mother, the woman who had raised him alone after his father died in battle, the woman who had sacrificed everything to ensure he grew strong and capable, the woman who had loved him unconditionally, even when he made himself unlovable through his rage and his pain. She had wandered away from the palace 3 nights ago, during a moment when her caretakers were distracted. By the time they realized she was gone, night had fallen. And now this storm, this impossible, unnatural storm, had made the search nearly impossible. Nathaniel pressed his forehead against the cold glass, his breath fogging the window. His advisors had urged him to wait, to let the storm pass before resuming the search. But every moment his mother was out there, lost and alone and afraid, was a moment of torture for him. He had torn apart his own chambers in rage and desperation, had threatened anyone who suggested giving up hope. The sound of footsteps behind him made him turn. Marcus, his beta and closest friend, entered carrying a tray of food that Nathaniel had no interest in consuming. "You need to eat, my king," Marcus said quietly, setting the tray on a nearby table. "You haven't slept or eaten in days. You cannot help your mother if you collapse from exhaustion." Nathaniel's eyes flashed with anger, his alpha presence filling the room like a physical force. "Do not presume to tell me what I can or cannot do. My mother is out there in that storm. Every moment I waste here is a moment she is suffering." Marcus held his ground, one of the few people brave or foolish enough to do so when Nathaniel was in such a state. "I know, and we will find her. But destroying yourself serves no one, least of all her." The anger drained from Nathaniel as quickly as it had come, leaving only exhaustion and grief. He slumped into a chair, his powerful frame seeming to collapse in on itself. When he spoke again, his voice was raw with pain. "She doesn't deserve this, Marcus. After everything she has done, everything she has sacrificed, she deserves to spend her final years in peace and comfort. Not lost and terrified in the snow, not unable to remember her own name. The universe is cruel to take her mind like this, to steal from her the very thing that made her who she was." Marcus approached carefully, placing a hand on his king's shoulder. "She is strong, stronger than you give her credit for. If anyone can survive this storm, it is her." Nathaniel wanted to believe that, but he had seen how fragile she had become, how the confusion stripped away her strength and confidence. He remembered finding her in the palace gardens once, weeping because she could not remember where her chambers were, could not recognize the home she had lived in for decades. That night, he had held her while she cried, had stroked her hair and promised that he would keep her safe, that he would never let anything harm her. But he had failed. He had not kept her safe. And now she was out there, and he did not know if he would ever see her alive again. "Tell me about when you were young," Marcus said quietly, understanding that his king needed distraction, needed something to focus on besides his fear. "Tell me about her." Nathaniel's expression softened, memory overtaking present anguish. She was fierce. People underestimated her because she was gentle, but beneath that gentleness was steel. "When my father died and the court vultures circled, thinking to take advantage of a widow and her young son, she faced them down without flinching. She protected me, protected our claim to the throne, and she did it with grace and intelligence that left our enemies baffled." He smiled despite everything, lost in remembrance. "She used to read to me every night. Even when she was exhausted, even when the responsibilities of running the kingdom threatened to drown her, she would come to my chambers and read. Sometimes histories, sometimes poetry, sometimes stories she made up herself." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Those were the moments when I felt safest, when nothing else mattered except the sound of her voice and the knowledge that she loved me." "And she knows you love her in return," Marcus said firmly. "No matter what the sickness takes from her, that knowledge remains." Love like that does not simply disappear. Nathaniel wanted to believe that too, but doubt gnawed at him. Fear that his mother was out there not just lost, but alone in every sense, unable to hold on to even the memory of the son who would tear the world apart to find her. He stood abruptly, decision crystallizing. "I'm going out there. Storm be damned. I am not sitting in this palace one more moment while she is missing." Marcus began to protest, but Nathaniel silenced him with a look. "Gather my best men, those who are willing to brave this storm. We leave within the hour. We search until we find her, or until the storm takes us. Those are the only options." There was no arguing with that tone, that expression. Marcus simply nodded and left to carry out the orders. Nathaniel remained alone, staring out at the storm that seemed determined to keep him from his mother. "Hold on," he whispered again, the words a prayer and a promise. "I am coming. I will find you. Just please, hold on." The storm offered no response, no comfort. It simply raged, indifferent to the desperation of one man, no matter how powerful, no matter how determined. But Nathaniel had not become Alpha King by accepting defeat. He would find his mother. He would bring her home. And nothing, not storm or fate or the gods themselves, would stop him. Back in Ravenna's cottage, the hours blurred together into a strange, timeless existence. The storm raged for days without pause, the snow piling so high against the walls that the little house seemed in danger of being buried entirely. Ravenna's food stores dwindled rapidly, shared between two mouths instead of one. But she did not hesitate or regret her choice. The second day brought new challenges. Ravenna woke to find the cottage even colder than before, the fire having burned dangerously low during the night. She scrambled to build it back up, using wood that should have lasted her another week, knowing that at this rate, they would run out long before the storm ended. But the old woman was alive. That was what mattered. Alive and, surprisingly, improving. The warmth and care were working their magic, color returning to her cheeks, strength slowly seeping back into her limbs. "What is your name, child?" the woman asked, as Ravenna served them both thin soup made from vegetables and the last of her dried meat. "I keep calling you kind things, Angel, Savior, but surely you have a proper name." "Ravenna," she answered softly. "Ravenna Nightcrest." The woman repeated it, tasting each syllable. "It suits you, mysterious and beautiful, like the night itself." She tilted her head, studying Ravenna with eyes that seemed clearer today. "Why do you live alone, Ravenna Nightcrest? A young woman like you should have family, pack, people who love her." Ravenna stiffened, old wounds reopening at the question. "I am Omega. In my village, that makes me less than. My parents died when I was young, and there was no one else who wanted the burden of raising an Omega child. So I raised myself." The woman's face filled with such genuine sorrow and anger that Ravenna was startled. "That is wrong. Omega is not less. Omega is necessary, precious. Without Omega, there is no balance, no softness to temper the hardness of Alpha, no bridge between extremes." She reached out and took Ravenna's hand. "Anyone who made you feel less than worthy is a fool who does not understand the true nature of our kind." Ravenna felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever said such things to her. No one had ever suggested that her designation was anything but a curse. "My son," the woman continued, her expression growing distant as she struggled with memory. "My son is Alpha, the strongest I have ever known. But without me to temper him, to show him gentleness and compassion, he would have become a monster. Alpha needs Omega, just as Omega needs Alpha. We are two halves of a whole. Tell me more about him," Ravenna urged gently, partly because she could see the woman needed to talk, to hold on to these precious memories, but also because she found herself genuinely curious about this son who inspired such fierce love. The woman smiled, lost in remembrance. He was such a serious child. Too serious, really. He felt everything so deeply, every injustice, every cruelty, every moment of suffering. When his father died, I thought he would break from the grief. He was only 8 years old, and suddenly he was expected to be strong, to show no weakness, to become the man the kingdom needed. She paused, her eyes growing wet. I found him one night in the gardens, weeping so hard he could barely breathe. He had been holding it together all day, being strong for everyone else. And then in the darkness, alone, he fell apart. I held him and let him cry. And I told him that strength is not the absence of feeling. Strength is feeling everything and choosing to keep going anyway. Ravenna listened, enthralled. This window into someone else's life, someone else's love, was fascinating and painful all at once. He grew into such a good man, the woman continued. Fierce, yes. Terrifying to his enemies, certainly. But good. Kind. Protective of those weaker than himself. He never forgot what it felt like to be helpless, to be suffering, and so he made it his mission to protect others from that feeling. She looked at Ravenna directly. He would like you, I think. He has always respected those who show kindness without expecting anything in return. The third day brought a new trial. Ravenna woke to discover that one section of the cottage wall had partially collapsed under the weight of the snow. Freezing wind poured through the gap, threatening to steal what little warmth they had managed to preserve. She spent hours stuffing the hole with blankets, furniture, anything she could find, while the old woman watched anxiously, wanting to help, but too weak to do more than offer encouragement. When Ravenna finally collapsed back by the fire, exhausted and shivering, the old woman opened her arms. Come here, child. Share warmth with me as I shared with you. Ravenna hesitated only a moment before accepting the embrace. They sat together, two women who had been strangers days ago, now holding each other like family. And in that moment, Ravenna realized something profound. This was what she had been missing all her life. Not romance, not physical desire, but this simple comfort of being cared for, of mattering to someone, of knowing that her presence brought joy rather than burden. I wish I could keep you, the old woman murmured, her voice sleepy. I wish you were mine. My daughter. I always wanted a daughter. Ravenna's throat closed with emotion. I wish that too. They fell asleep like that, curled together for warmth and comfort, while outside the storm continued its relentless assault. The fourth day was when things took a turn for the worse. Ravenna woke to find the old woman burning with fever, delirious and calling out for her son. The cold, the exhaustion, the trauma of being lost had finally caught up with her body's defenses. Ravenna worked frantically, using the last of her herbs to make fever-reducing tea, bathing the woman's forehead with cool water, wrapping her in blankets while simultaneously trying to bring down her dangerous temperature. It was a delicate balance, and Ravenna was terrified she would get it wrong. Please, she whispered, not sure if she was praying to the gods or the universe, or simply speaking into the void. Please don't let her die. Not after everything. Please. The woman thrashed in fever dreams, sometimes crying, sometimes shouting commands that suggested she had once held power and authority. And always, she called for Nathaniel. Her son's name was a constant refrain, spoken with love and desperation and need. Ravenna stayed awake all that night and the next day, monitoring every breath, every change in temperature, every moment. She gave the woman more than half their remaining food, knowing that strength would be needed for recovery. She told her stories, read to her from the only 2 books she owned, sang every song she could remember. You have to stay, Ravenna pleaded during a moment when the woman's eyes opened, confused and unfocused. Your son needs you. He is looking for you. He will find you. But you have to stay alive until he does. The woman's hand gripped hers weakly. Promise me, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Promise me you will take care of him. When I am gone, promise me someone will love him the way he deserves. You are not dying, Ravenna said fiercely. Do you hear me? You are not dying. I will not let you. But still, she made the promise. Because sometimes, that is all we can do. Make promises we hope we never have to keep. Swear oaths to people we may never meet, because the alternative is to accept defeat, and Ravenna had learned long ago that she was too stubborn for that. By the 5th day, the woman's fever broke. She woke weak but clear-eyed, looking around the cottage with better awareness than she had shown since arriving. "You saved me again," she said simply. Ravenna smiled through her exhaustion. "That is what family does. We save each other." The woman's eyes filled with tears. Family. Yes, that is what we are we not? Family by choice, if not by blood. The strongest kind of family, Ravenna agreed. Over the next 2 days, as the storm finally began to show signs of weakening, the old woman, whom Ravenna had begun calling Ilara, a name she chose because it meant starlight, and seemed to fit this gentle soul who had appeared from the darkness, slowly grew stronger. The warmth and care worked their magic, and though her memory remained frustratingly absent, her spirit seemed to brighten. Ilara began to help with small tasks, folding blankets, stirring soup, organizing Ravenna's meager belongings with a care that suggested she had once run a household herself. Sometimes she would hum melodies that seemed to come from some deep, untouchable place, songs that made Ravenna's heart ache with their beauty and sadness. "Will you teach me those songs?" Ravenna asked one evening as they sat by the fire, the storm still howling outside, but with less ferocity than before. Ilara looked surprised. "You want to learn them? They are beautiful." "And," Ravenna hesitated, then spoke honestly, "I want to remember this time, remember you. Even after you return to your life, to your family, I want to have something of you with me." Ilara pulled Ravenna into a tight embrace. "Oh, my dear child, you will not need songs to remember me. We are bound now, you and I. Whatever happens, wherever life takes us, that bond will not break." They spent the evening learning songs together. Ilara's voice thin but sweet. Ravenna's voice finding harmonies she had not known she possessed. It was a moment of perfect peace in the midst of chaos, a small light in the darkness that threatened to swallow them. "Tell me about yourself, child," Ilara said once the songs were learned. "You've given me so much, and I know nothing of who you are." Ravenna hesitated, unused to being asked about herself, unused to anyone caring enough to ask. "There's not much to tell. I'm Omega. I live alone. I survive." "That's not a story," Ilara said gently. "That's a list of facts. What do you dream of? What makes your heart sing?" The questions were so unexpected, so tender, that Ravenna found herself answering honestly. "I dream of belonging somewhere, of being wanted, not just tolerated. I dream of a home that's more than just shelter, a family that's more than just blood." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I dream of someone looking at me the way they look at people they love, not the way they look at something broken or unwanted." Ilara reached out and took Ravenna's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You are not broken. You are not unwanted. You are precious beyond measure, and someday someone will see that truth and never let you go." Ravenna wanted to believe her, but life had taught her that fairy tales were for other people, not for girls with white hair and Omega blood who lived on the margins of society. Yet as the days passed, something unexpected began to grow between them. Ilara's presence filled spaces in Ravenna's life she had not realized were empty. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing. Ilara's memory might be gone, but her wisdom remained, her kindness, her ability to see straight into Ravenna's heart and speak to the wounded parts with compassion. And Ravenna, in turn, discovered a fierce protectiveness toward this woman who had wandered into her life. She would wake in the night and check to make sure Ilara was still breathing, still warm, still safe. She would give Ilara the larger portion of food, would sit up late ensuring the fire never went out, would sacrifice her own comfort without a second thought. They were becoming family, these two lost souls, bound not by blood, but by choice and care. It was on the 7th day of the storm that everything changed. Ravenna was attempting to dig a path to her woodshed, the snow now so high it reached above the cottage windows, when she heard something that made her heart stop. Voices. Multiple voices calling out, searching. She climbed the snowbank and saw them. A dozen men, warriors by the look of them, moving through the storm with supernatural determination. They wore the insignia of the royal house, and at their center was a figure that seemed carved from legend itself. Nathaniel Voidfang was terrifying to behold. Towering and powerful, his long black hair whipping in the wind, his beard crusted with ice, his eyes blazing with an intensity that was almost frightening. He moved through the storm as if it were nothing, as if his will alone could part the snow and wind. And perhaps it could. He was Alpha King after all, and power radiated from him in waves that made Ravenna's Omega instincts scream at her to submit, to bow, to make herself small and unthreatening. But she stood her ground on her snowbank, this small woman in a scarlet dress, and called out to them. The entire group stopped as if struck. Nathaniel's head snapped toward her, his eyes locking onto hers with such force that she nearly stumbled backward. In 3 powerful strides, he was standing before her, looking down from his great height, his presence overwhelming. You. His voice was rough, harsh with exhaustion and emotion. Have you seen an old woman? Silver hair, confused, lost? His voice cracked almost imperceptibly. She's my mother. She's been missing for over a week. Ravenna's mind raced, pieces clicking into place. The royal insignia, the desperate search. The name Alara, the woman she had been calling Alara, had been crying out in her sleep. Nathaniel. This was her son. This terrifying, powerful man was the boy his mother's broken mind kept reaching for. Yes, Ravenna said, and watched hope and terror war across Nathaniel's face. She's inside. She's safe. She's been with me since the storm began. Nathaniel did not wait for more explanation. He pushed past Ravenna, his men following, all of them cramming into the tiny cottage that suddenly seemed impossibly small. And there, sitting by the fire wrapped in blankets, looking up with wide, startled eyes, was his mother. Time seemed to stop. Nathaniel fell to his knees before her, this powerful king reduced to a trembling child in the presence of the one person who held his entire heart. His hands reached for her, then hesitated, afraid she would not know him, afraid he would see that terrible blankness in her eyes. "Mother," he whispered, and his voice was broken, raw, stripped of all authority and power. It was just a son, desperate for recognition. The old woman, Alara, his mother, stared at him. Her brow furrowed with concentration, with effort. Something flickered in her eyes, a light struggling to return. She raised a trembling hand to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines of his jaw, his cheekbones, as if trying to remember through touch what her mind could not recall. And then, like dawn breaking after an endless night, recognition flooded her features. Her eyes filled with tears, her mouth opened in a sob of relief and joy. Nathaniel, my boy, my son. He pulled her into his arms then, this giant of a man cradling his fragile mother against his chest, his powerful frame shaking with sobs he had been holding back for days. The other warriors turned away, giving their king this moment of privacy, this moment of vulnerability they would never speak of beyond these walls. Ravenna stood in the doorway, watching this reunion, feeling like an intruder in this intimate moment. She began to back away, to give them space, but Nathaniel's head turned toward her. His eyes, still wet with tears, found hers. "You saved her," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You kept her alive. You brought her back to me." Ravenna shook her head, uncomfortable with the gratitude, with the intensity of his gaze. Anyone would have done the same. "But that's not true," Nathaniel's mother said, her voice weak but clear. She pulled back from her son to look at him directly. "This girl found me dying in the snow. She gave me her own cloak. She shared her food when she had almost nothing. She stayed with me through the worst storm anyone has ever seen. She loved me when she had no reason to love me, when she didn't even know who I was. The old woman turned to Ravenna, her eyes shining. She saved my life. She gave me hope. She reminded me that there is still goodness in this world. Nathaniel rose to his feet, his full attention now fixed on Ravenna. She felt small beneath that gaze, but not afraid. There was something in his eyes beyond gratitude, something that looked like wonder. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice softer now, the harsh edges smoothed away. "Ravenna. Ravenna Nightcrest." He studied her for a long moment, taking in her white hair, her scarlet dress, the way she held herself with dignity despite her obvious poverty. He was seeing her, really seeing her, in a way that made her feel both exposed and valued. "How can I repay this debt, Ravenna Nightcrest? Name your price. Anything you want is yours. Gold, land, title, anything within my power to grant." But Ravenna shook her head, her voice steady despite the chaos of emotions swirling through her. "I don't want payment. I didn't save her for a reward. I saved her because it was right, because she needed help and I could give it." This answer seemed to affect Nathaniel deeply. Something shifted in his expression, a wall coming down, a door opening. He looked at her with such intensity that she felt it like a physical touch. "Then allow me at least to ensure you are cared for. The storm has destroyed your supplies. Your home has damage. You must be exhausted beyond measure. Come with us to the palace. Rest, recover. Let me show you even a fraction of the kindness you showed my mother." Before Ravenna could respond, his mother spoke up. "Yes, child. Please come." "I don't," her voice faltered. "I don't want to leave you. I feel safe with you. Please." And how could Ravenna refuse that plea? She nodded, still uncertain, still feeling like this was all some strange dream from which she would soon wake. The journey to the palace was surreal. They traveled in carriages designed to move through even the deepest snow, pulled by horses bred for strength and endurance. Ravenna sat with Nathaniel's mother, holding her hand, while Nathaniel rode outside with his men, ensuring their safe passage. But every time Ravenna looked out the window, she found his eyes on her, watching, assessing. Something unreadable in his expression. The palace was unlike anything Ravenna had imagined. Massive and imposing, yes, but also beautiful in its severity, like Nathaniel himself. She was given rooms that were larger than her entire cottage, with a bed so soft she almost wept when she lay down on it. Servants brought her food, hot water for bathing, new clothes and fabrics so fine she was afraid to touch them. But despite the luxury, Ravenna felt lost. This was not her world. These were not her people. She was a mouse that had somehow wandered into a dragon's lair, and she did not know the rules of survival here. It was Nathaniel's mother who anchored her. The old woman, whose true name was Seraphine, requested that Ravenna stay near her, and Nathaniel, desperate to keep his mother happy and stable, agreed immediately. So Ravenna found herself spending her days in Seraphine's apartments, talking, reading aloud, helping her with the exercises the palace healers prescribed to help strengthen her memory, and Nathaniel was always there, not hovering, exactly, but present. He would sit quietly in the corner while Ravenna read to his mother. He would join them for meals, his fierce demeanor softening in Seraphine's presence. He would ask Ravenna questions about her life, her interests, her thoughts on everything from politics to poetry, and he listened to her answers with an attention that felt almost sacred. Ravenna began to see the duality of him. To the world, he was the alpha king, terrifying and untouchable. But with his mother, he was gentle, patient, devoted. He would brush her hair with hands that could break stone. He would tuck blankets around her with the tenderness of someone handling the most precious treasure. He would read to her when her eyes grew tired, his deep voice softening to something almost melodic. and increasingly, Ravenna noticed that same gentleness being directed toward her. The way he would ensure she had the most comfortable chair. The way he remembered her preferences, her little comments about liking certain foods or flowers. The way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention, his expression unguarded and vulnerable. Seraphine noticed too. She began to encourage them to spend time together, to walk in the palace gardens, to share meals alone. Her memory was improving, slowly but steadily, helped by the care of the healers and the loving presence of her son. But with that returning memory came wisdom, came the ability to see what was growing between these two damaged souls who had found each other in the most unlikely way. One evening, about 3 weeks after Ravenna had arrived at the palace, Nathaniel asked if she would walk with him. The storm had finally broken days before, and the world outside was buried in snow, but beautiful, the sun turning everything into diamonds. They walked in silence for a while, the crunch of snow beneath their feet the only sound. Finally, Nathaniel spoke. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting until I'm finished. Can you do that?" Ravenna nodded, her heart suddenly racing. "When I found my mother in your cottage, when I saw that you had saved her, I felt gratitude. That's natural, expected. But there was something else too, something I did not understand at first." He paused, seeming to struggle with words. This man who commanded armies with ease. "When I looked at you, standing there in your red dress covered in snow, I felt recognition. Like I had been searching for you my entire life without knowing it." Ravenna's breath caught, but she remained silent, as promised. "The past weeks, getting to know you, watching you with my mother, seeing your kindness, your strength, your grace. That feeling has only grown stronger. You are not what I expected. You are not what I thought I needed. But you are everything I have been waiting for." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully, his dark eyes intense. "I know this is sudden. I know you probably think I'm insane. But I am Alpha King, and I have learned to trust my instincts. And every instinct I possess is screaming at me that you are meant to be mine." Ravenna stared at him, her mind reeling. This could not be real. Men like Nathaniel did not choose women like her. Powerful alphas did not bond with poor omegas who lived on the margins. This was a fairy tale, and she had learned long ago that those were not real. "I'm Omega," she said, her voice barely audible. "I have nothing. I am nothing. She hesitated, then forced herself to continue. "I'm not worthy of someone like you." Nathaniel's expression transformed. Anger flashed across his features, but it was not directed at her. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming but not threatening. When he spoke, his voice was fierce. "Do not ever say that again. Do not ever diminish yourself in that way. You are Omega, yes, and that makes you precious, not lesser. You have nothing material, perhaps, but you have a heart that moved you to save a dying stranger in a blizzard. You are worthy of everything good this world has to offer, and anyone who ever made you feel otherwise was wrong." He took her hands in his, and his touch was surprisingly gentle for someone so powerful. "I am Alpha King. I am feared by my enemies and respected by my people. But with you, I want to be just Nathaniel. I want to be the man who deserves the way you look at my mother, who earns the trust you give so carefully. I want to be yours, if you will have me." Ravenna's eyes filled with tears. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever seen her as valuable, as worthy of love and devotion. Part of her wanted to run, to protect herself from the inevitable moment when he realized his mistake. But a larger part, the part that had been lonely for so long, wanted desperately to believe him. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "I'm afraid this isn't real. I'm afraid I'll wake up and be alone again." Nathaniel raised her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a reverence that made her shiver. Then let me spend every day proving to you that this is real. Let me show you that you are safe with me, that you are loved, that you are home. And in that moment, standing in the snow under the winter sun, Ravenna made a choice. She chose to be brave. She chose to trust. She chose to believe that maybe, just maybe, the universe had decided she deserved something beautiful. Yes, she said, her voice stronger now. Yes, I will have you. The smile that broke across Nathaniel's face transformed him completely. The fierce king disappeared, and in his place was a man experiencing pure joy. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and Ravenna melted into his embrace. She felt safe in a way she had never felt before, protected and cherished and wanted. When they returned to the palace, Seraphine took one look at them and laughed with delight. Finally, she said, pulling them both into a hug, I was beginning to think you two would never figure it out. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Ravenna's life. Nathaniel courted her with a devotion that left her breathless. He brought her gifts, but they were never ostentatious or generic. Instead, they were thoughtful. Books he thought she would enjoy, flowers in her favorite colors, a new cloak, red like her dress, but made of the finest wool to keep her warm. One afternoon, he took her to the palace library, a massive room with shelves that reached toward the vaulted ceiling, filled with more books than Ravenna had ever imagined existed. I want you to feel at home here, he said quietly, watching her face as she stared in wonder at the endless volumes. Everything I have is yours. This library, these rooms, this entire palace. But more than that, I want you to know that you belong here not because I am king, but because I am yours. Ravenna turned to him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear that despite everything, she might still leave him. She stepped close, reaching up to touch his bearded jaw, and felt him lean into her touch like a man starved for affection. I have been alone for so long, she whispered. I built walls around myself because it hurt less than hoping for something I thought I could never have. But you, Nathaniel, you make me want to tear those walls down. You make me want to be brave enough to love. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm, his eyes never leaving hers. Then be brave with me. Let me prove that I am worthy of that gift. Let me show you every day that loving me will not hurt you, will not leave you empty or alone. I want to fill your life with so much joy that the lonely years become nothing but a distant memory. They spent hours in that library, Ravenna exploring the shelves while Nathaniel sat nearby, watching her with an expression that mixed wonder and tenderness. Sometimes she would read passages aloud, and he would listen as if her words were the most important thing in the world. Sometimes he would share stories from his own reading, his deep voice making even the driest historical text sound like poetry. It was during these quiet moments that Ravenna saw most clearly the duality of him. The world knew Nathaniel Voidfang as a terrifying force, a king whose wrath could topple kingdoms. But with her, he was patient and gentle, attentive and sweet. He listened when she spoke, remembered every detail she shared, made her feel like she was the center of his universe. But she also witnessed his ferocity. One afternoon, while walking through the palace grounds with Nathaniel and Seraphine, they encountered a group of nobles from a visiting delegation. One of them, emboldened by wine and arrogance, made a crude comment about omegas, clearly intending it as an insult to Ravenna. The change in Nathaniel was instantaneous. One moment he was relaxed, smiling at something his mother had said. The next, he was a storm-given human form. He moved with frightening speed, backing the noble against a wall, his hand around the man's throat, his eyes blazing with barely controlled rage. "Say another word," Nathaniel growled, his voice so low and dangerous that everyone nearby froze. "Say one more disparaging thing about omegas, about her, and I will show you exactly why kingdoms fear me. Do you understand?" The noble nodded frantically, terror written across his features. Nathaniel released him with a sound of disgust, then turned back to Ravenna, his expression immediately softening. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle again, checking her for any sign of distress. Ravenna should have been frightened by that display of violence, that reminder of the power Nathaniel wielded. But instead, she felt valued, protected, cherished. He had not hesitated to defend her honor, to make clear that she was under his protection, and that insulting her was as good as declaring war on him personally. The noble and his delegation left the next day, and Nathaniel issued a kingdom-wide decree. Anyone who showed disrespect to Omegas within his lands would face severe consequences. Omega was to be honored, not denigrated. It was a radical stance for the time, but no one dared question it, not when their Alpha King spoke with such conviction and authority. That night, Ravenna found Nathaniel in his chambers, staring into the fireplace. She entered quietly, and he turned immediately, always aware of her presence. "Did I frighten you today?" he asked, his expression troubled. "I did not mean to. But when he spoke of you that way, when he dared to diminish you, He paused, struggling for words. I could not control my reaction. The thought of anyone hurting you, even with words, is intolerable to me. Ravenna crossed to him, taking his large hands in her smaller ones. You did not frighten me. You made me feel safe. You showed me that I matter, that my dignity and honor are worth defending. Do you know how powerful that is? To know that someone will stand up for you, will fight for you, will refuse to allow others to treat you as less than? He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. I will always defend you. I will always protect you. You are mine to cherish and guard, and I take that responsibility seriously. She tilted her head back to look up at him. And you are mine to care for and love. That goes both ways, Nathaniel. You protect me from the world, and I protect you from yourself, from the loneliness and isolation that being Alpha King brings. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a promise and a plea wrapped into one gesture. In his arms, Ravenna felt complete in a way she had never experienced before. This man, this powerful, terrifying, tender man had chosen her, and she had chosen him in return. Their evenings often included Seraphine, the three of them forming a family unit that felt natural and right. They would have dinner together in Seraphine's chambers, less formal than the state dinners Nathaniel was required to attend, more intimate and comfortable. Seraphine's memory continued to improve, slowly but steadily, helped by the care of the healers and the loving presence of her son and Ravenna. Sometimes she would have moments of confusion, forgetting where she was or who she was with. But these episodes were becoming less frequent, and she always had Nathaniel and Ravenna there to ground her, to bring her back. One evening, Seraphine looked between her son and Ravenna with tears in her eyes. Do you know what the two of you have given me? She asked. Hope. For so long, I felt myself slipping away, piece by piece, memory by memory. I was terrified that I would disappear entirely, that I would become nothing but an empty shell. But then Ravenna found me, saved me, loved me when she had no reason to. And watching the two of you together, seeing my son finally happy and at peace, has given me a reason to fight, to hold on to myself and my memories. Nathaniel knelt beside his mother's chair, taking her hand. You will never disappear, Mother. We will not let you. Ravenna and I will fight for you. We'll remind you of who you are. We'll keep your stories and your memories alive even when you cannot. Ravenna joined them, completing their small circle. We are family, she said simply. And family takes care of each other. Always. The healers attributed Seraphine's improvement to more than just their treatments. They spoke of the power of love, of the way emotional support and connection could strengthen both mind and body. Ravenna saw it clearly. Seraphine thrived because she was no longer facing her illness alone. She had two people who loved her fiercely, who refused to give up on her, who made her feel valued and important, despite the ways her mind betrayed her. As weeks became months, Ravenna began to truly understand the man she had fallen in love with. She witnessed Nathaniel in his role as king, watched him make difficult decisions with wisdom and compassion, saw the way he balanced justice with mercy. He could be harsh when necessary, terrifying when facing enemies or dealing with corruption. But he was also capable of incredible kindness, of listening to the concerns of even the lowest-ranking subjects, of using his power to protect those who could not protect themselves. One day, she watched from the shadows as a young Omega came to petition the king. The girl was trembling, clearly terrified, but desperate enough to seek royal intervention. Her Alpha Pack leader had been abusing her, using her designation as an excuse for cruelty. Nathaniel listened to her entire story without interruption, his expression growing darker with each word. When she finished, he thanked her for her bravery in coming forward, then immediately dispatched soldiers to arrest the pack leader. He also established a new law, creating protections specifically for Omegas and harsh penalties for any Alpha who abused their position of power. "You are changing the kingdom," Ravenna told him later that night, "making it better, safer, for people like me." He looked at her with fierce determination. "I am making it the kind of place you deserve to live in. A place where your worth is recognized, where your dignity is protected, where being Omega is celebrated rather than used as justification for mistreatment." But he listened when she spoke, remembered every detail she shared, made her feel like she was the center of his universe. He had other sides too, playful moments that surprised and delighted her. Once, during a formal state dinner, he caught her eye across the crowded banquet hall and made a face at one of the more pompous nobles, causing her to nearly choke on her wine, trying not to laugh. Later, in private, he admitted that court functions bored him senseless, and that her presence made them bearable. Sometimes, when they walked through the palace gardens, he would pick wildflowers and weave them into her white hair, his large warrior hands surprisingly gentle and skilled. When she asked where he learned such a thing, he smiled and said his mother had taught him when he was young, that she believed even fierce warriors should know how to create beauty. These moments, small and intimate, built a foundation of trust and affection that went far beyond physical attraction. Ravenna was falling deeply, irrevocably in love with all aspects of Nathaniel, the king and the man, the warrior and the gentle soul, the fierce protector and the vulnerable son who loved his mother more than anything. And Nathaniel, in turn, was transformed by love. His advisors noticed how he smiled more frequently, how his temper was slower to rise. His people saw a king who seemed more connected to their needs, more willing to listen and adapt. And those who knew him best understood that Ravenna had given him something he had not known he was missing. She had given him peace, companionship, a sense of home that went beyond mere physical location. But he never pushed her, never demanded more than she was ready to give. Their relationship deepened slowly, built on trust and genuine affection rather than mere physical attraction. With Seraphine, the three of them formed an unlikely but beautiful family. They shared meals, told stories, laughed together. Seraphine's memory continued to improve, and while she still had moments of confusion, they became less frequent. She would often sit with Ravenna and talk about Nathaniel's childhood, about the boy he had been, mischievous and loving and so full of life. He was always protective, even as a child. Seraphine said one afternoon as they sat in the sunroom, Nathaniel away handling kingdom business. He would bring home injured animals, lost children, anyone who needed help. That part of him never changed. He just learned to hide it behind walls, because the world expected him to be hard. Ravenna understood that. She had built her own walls, her own armor. But with Nathaniel, Those walls were coming down, brick by brick. She was learning to be soft, to be vulnerable, to accept love as well as give it. The palace staff noticed the change in their king. He smiled more, laughed more. The harsh edges that had defined him seemed to soften without losing any of his strength or authority. If anything, he became more effective as a ruler, because he was no longer driven solely by duty, but also by hope. There were those who disapproved, of course. Members of court who whispered that an Omega was unsuitable to be queen, that Nathaniel should choose someone of higher birth, better breeding. But Nathaniel shut down those whispers with a single terrifying display of his displeasure. He gathered his court and made his position devastatingly clear. Ravenna Nightcrest saved my mother's life when no one else could or would. She has shown more courage, more compassion, more strength than anyone in this room. If any of you question her worth, you question my judgment. And I promise you, that is not a position you want to be in. No one questioned her worth again, at least not openly. 3 months after that first walk in the snow, Nathaniel asked Ravenna to marry him. They were in Seraphine's room, the three of them together as they so often were. He got down on one knee before both women, because this was not just about Ravenna and him. This was about family, about the three of them choosing to bind their lives together. "Ravenna Nightcrest," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You walked into my life during my darkest moment and brought light back into it. You loved my mother when she was lost. You see me, not just the king but the man, and you somehow find me worthy anyway." He pulled out a ring, simple but beautiful. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life showing you how precious you are?" Ravenna could not speak through her tears. She simply nodded, over and over, until Nathaniel stood and pulled her into his arms. Seraphine wept tears of joy, embracing them both, her own happiness complete. The wedding was held on the first day of spring, when the snow finally melted and life began to return to the kingdom. It was a grand affair, because Nathaniel was king, and certain things were expected. But the moments that mattered most were intimate and small. The way Nathaniel's hands shook as he placed the ring on Ravenna's finger. The way Seraphine stood beside them, tears streaming down her face, whispering blessings. The way Ravenna felt the bond snap into place, powerful and undeniable, linking her soul to Nathaniel's in a way that transcended words or ceremony. When they kissed, sealing their vows, the entire crowd erupted in cheers. But Ravenna barely heard them. All she knew was the feel of Nathaniel's lips on hers, the strength of his arms around her, the absolute certainty that she was finally, truly home. That night, in the privacy of their chambers, Nathaniel was gentle and patient, showing Ravenna with his body what he had already proven with his words, that she was treasured, that she was desired, that she was loved beyond measure. He worshipped her like she was something sacred, and in his arms, Ravenna finally understood that she was not broken or unworthy. She was exactly who she was meant to be. The seasons turned, and life continued. Ravenna adjusted to her role as queen, surprising herself with how naturally it came to her. Her kindness and genuine care for the people made her beloved, while Nathaniel's strength protected them. Together, they were balanced, complete. Seraphine lived in the palace with them, her memory now mostly restored, though she still had difficult days. On those days, Ravenna and Nathaniel would care for her together, patient and loving, grateful for every moment they had with her. One evening, nearly a year after that fateful day in the snowstorm, the three of them sat together in the sunroom watching the sunset. Seraphine looked at her son and daughter-in-law, her eyes bright with contentment. "Do you remember what I told you, Ravenna, that night in your cottage?" she asked. "When I said that someday, someone would see how precious you are and never let you go?" Ravenna smiled, reaching for Nathaniel's hand. "I remember. I did not know then that I was talking about my own son," Seraphine continued. I did not know that by saving me you were finding your destiny. But the universe knew. It brought us together for a reason. Nathaniel raised Ravenna's hand to his lips, kissing it gently. The universe gave me back my mother and brought me the love of my life, all in one impossible moment. I could never repay that debt. You don't have to, Ravenna said softly. Love is not a debt to be repaid. It is a gift to be cherished. They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Three souls who had each been lost in their own way, but had found each other when it mattered most. The past with all its pain and loneliness had led them to this moment, this perfect, peaceful now. Outside, spring was giving way to summer. The kingdom was thriving under Nathaniel and Ravenna's rule. The people were happy, prosperous, safe. But inside this small circle of three, in this moment of quiet togetherness, was where the real magic lived. This was the truest victory, the deepest happiness. Ravenna thought back to that day in the forest, when she had found a dying woman in the snow and made the choice to help. She had expected nothing in return, had wanted nothing except to ease someone's suffering. But the universe, in its infinite wisdom, had given her everything. A family, a purpose, a love so deep and true, it defied all logic and expectation. She leaned her head against Nathaniel's shoulder, felt Seraphine's hand cover hers, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The girl who had lived on the margins, who had thought herself unworthy of love, had become queen. But more importantly, she had become beloved. And sometimes, on winter nights when the snow fell soft and gentle outside their windows, Ravenna would stand at the glass and remember. She would remember the cold, the fear, the lonely years before. She would remember finding Seraphine, half frozen and lost. She would remember the worst snowstorm the kingdom had ever seen, the storm that had changed everything. Nathaniel would come up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, understanding without words what she was thinking. He would hold her close, his chin resting on top of her white hair, and they would watch the snow together. Every storm passes, he would murmur. Every darkness ends. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, the storm brings you exactly what you needed, even if you did not know you needed it. Ravenna would turn in his arms, looking up into those dark eyes that held such fierce love for her, and she would smile. The coldest storm of winter had led her to the warmest spring of love. The moment of her greatest fear had become the gateway to her greatest joy. That is the way of the universe, she would reply. It breaks us down to build us up stronger. It takes everything away to give us what we truly need. And what do you need? Nathaniel would ask, though he already knew the answer. This, Ravenna would say simply. You, your mother, this family we have built, this love that feels like coming home. I need nothing more than this. He would kiss her then, soft and slow, a promise renewed with every touch. Behind them, if they listened carefully, they might hear Seraphine humming one of her old melodies, content in the knowledge that her son had found his match, that her family was complete. Years would pass, and they would face new challenges, new joys, new sorrows. Children would come, with Nathaniel's dark hair and Ravenna's pale eyes, filling the palace with laughter and chaos. Seraphine would eventually leave them, her memory intact and her heart full, passing peacefully in her sleep surrounded by those she loved most. But through it all, the foundation would remain unshakable. Ravenna and Nathaniel, bound by a love that had been forged in the coldest winter and tested by the harshest storms, they would rule with wisdom and compassion, their people prospering under their care. They would grow old together, their love deepening with each passing year rather than fading. And always, they would remember the beginning. The old woman lost in the snow. The girl in the red dress who stopped to help. The worst snowstorm the kingdom had ever seen. The moment when destiny reached down and rearranged their lives into something beautiful. Because sometimes the most important moments do not announce themselves with fanfare. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in the form of a stranger who needs help. A choice made from kindness rather than calculation. A storm that forces you to stop running and start living. Ravenna had saved Seraphine because it was right. Because she could not bear to leave someone to die alone in the cold. She had expected nothing, wanted nothing except to ease suffering. But in that simple act of compassion, she had saved herself as well. She had opened a door to a future she could never have imagined, a life rich with love and purpose and belonging. And Nathaniel, the fierce alpha king who terrified his enemies and commanded respect through strength, had found in this small Omega woman everything he had been missing. She softened him without weakening him. She challenged him without defying him. She loved him not for his power or position, but for who he was beneath all of that. Together, they were complete. Separately, they had been strong. Together, they were unstoppable. The story of the girl who helped an old woman in the worst snowstorm, unaware she was saving the Alpha King's missing mother, became legend. Parents told it to their children, who told it to their children. It became a tale about kindness, about the unexpected ways the universe rewards those who act with pure hearts, about the transformative power of love. But for Ravenna and Nathaniel, it was not a legend or a story. It was simply their life, their truth, their beautiful, imperfect, absolutely perfect reality. On quiet nights, when the palace was dark and still, when their children were asleep and the kingdom was at peace, they would lie together in their bed and talk about everything and nothing, about the past and the future, about dreams and fears and hopes. And sometimes Ravenna would trace the lines of Nathaniel's face with her fingers and whisper the words that never stopped being true. "I love you." And he would pull her closer, his powerful arms gentle, his voice soft with wonder and gratitude. "I love you more." And maybe they were both right. Maybe love, when it is true and deep and pure, cannot be measured or compared. Maybe it simply is, infinite and eternal, a force as unstoppable as the changing seasons, as inevitable as the rising sun. In the end, that is what Ravenna learned. Love is not something you earn or deserve. It is not something that comes to those who are worthy or perfect. Love is grace. It arrives when you least expect it, in forms you never anticipated, and it transforms everything it touches. She had been a girl lost in her own winter, cold and alone, and certain she would never be warm again. And then she had found an old woman dying in the snow, and that simple choice, that moment of compassion, had led her to the warmth of family, the fire of passion, the comfort of belonging. The worst snowstorm the kingdom had ever seen had brought her the greatest gift of her life, and for that, she would be grateful every single day, for as long as she drew breath. Outside, the world continued its eternal dance. Seasons changed, time passed. But inside the palace, inside the hearts of those who dwelt there, a different kind of eternity lived. The eternity of love chosen, of family built, of home found after long wandering in the cold. And if you listen very carefully, on winter nights when the snow began to fall, you might hear it. The echo of that first storm, the whisper of destiny being fulfilled, the sound of two souls who had each been broken, finding in each other the pieces they needed to become whole. That is the true magic of the story, not in the grandeur of palaces or the power of kings, but in the simple, profound truth that sometimes the most broken among us have the greatest capacity for love, that sometimes the coldest storms lead to the warmest springs, that sometimes, when we reach out to save another, we end up saving ourselves. Ravenna Nightcrest had learned this truth. She carried it in her heart, shared it with her children, lived it every day of her life. And when her time came, many years later, to lay down her crown and close her eyes for the final time, it was with Nathaniel's hand in hers and the absolute certainty that she had been loved completely, had loved completely in return. And that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this beautiful love story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.